welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a pretty wild inside-out journey. We're going to explore the invisible forces that dictate, well, almost everything about how we live. We're going to start really small, looking at the microscopic biological chemistry right inside our own brains, and then we're going to gradually zoom all the way out to look at the deep mathematical fabric of the cosmos itself. It's a fascinating progression, and honestly, by the end of this, you might just look at your daily routine in a completely different way. But right off the bat, I want to ask you a question. Are you actually in control of your reality? The philosopher Alan Watts once suggested that before we go trying to save the world or figure out the entire universe, we need to pause for a moment of true silence. And he didn't just mean keeping our mouths shut. He meant pausing that constant, chattering internal dialogue we all have inside our skulls. Because think about it. If we're constantly thinking, we only ever have our own thoughts to interact with. We lose touch with reality as it actually is. So let's just clear our minds for a second, step outside that illusion of total control, and look at the actual forces steering the ship. Part 1, Biology, Dopamine, and Drive. The chemistry of motivation. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to start with the microscopic foundation of our daily lives, our biological rhythms. You might think your energy levels are just a matter of willpower, but it actually comes down to cellular chemistry. Let's map out the absolute optimal morning routine, based on the research of Stanford neurobiologist Andrew Huberman. Minute 1 of your day isn't actually driven by your alarm clock. It's driven by biology. Your core body temperature naturally rises, which triggers a healthy spike of cortisol to wake you up. Then, by minute 10, you should be getting natural sunlight in your eyes. This is absolutely crucial. It literally anchors that cortisol pulse and sets the circadian clocks present in every single cell of your body. And notice that 90-minute mark. If you just delay your morning coffee by an hour and a half, you allow your body to naturally clear out adenosine, which is a chemical that makes you sleepy, and that completely prevents that dreadful afternoon crash. We're not just waking up here, we're orchestrating our internal chemistry. Now, a massive part of that chemical orchestration is dopamine. We usually mistake dopamine for the pleasure molecule, right? But it's actually the molecule of motivation, craving, and pursuit. It's essentially your biological life force. When you get that morning sunlight, or say you take a cold plunge that raises your core body temperature, you naturally trigger this massive, healthy, long-lasting release of dopamine and epinephrine. And this is exactly what primes you to tackle difficult tasks and go after your goals all day long. But here's where things get a little tricky. As author Simon Sinek points out, modern technology is hijacking this incredibly powerful dopamine drive, and it's doing it in a pretty dangerous sequence. We've got a whole generation that grew up seeking instant gratification through the unfiltered dopamine hits of smartphones and social media. And because this happens during adolescence, which we all know is a highly stressful period, the brain becomes hardwired to seek out devices for comfort. The problem? They miss out on developing deep interpersonal coping mechanisms. So when real significant stress hits in adulthood, they don't turn to a person, they turn to a screen. They want that immediate feeling of making an impact, but they just haven't learned the patience required to climb the slow, messy, arduous mountain of real-world fulfillment.
Part 2, Escaping Mass Psychosis. How populations lose their minds.
So if that's how an individual mind gets hijacked, let's zoom out to society. What happens when an entire society's psychology is manipulated? Well, the psychologist Carl Jung warned that the absolute greatest threat to humanity isn't nature, or famine, or disease, it's our own unchecked psychic epidemics. When a society descends into collective delusions, it's known as a mass psychosis. The Dutch medical doctor Joost Meerlo actually coined a terrifying term for how this is deliberately induced: menticide, literally the systematic killing of the mind. It's a psychological intervention designed to imprint opportunistic thoughts onto the minds of the masses, basically to enforce obedience. So how does menticide actually happen? Psychologists have outlined a very specific historical playbook for this. First, you sow panic through relentless, staggered waves of terror. A frightened mind is a vulnerable mind. Second, you spread contradictory, nonsensical information. You see, logic can be fought with logic, but intentional confusion completely breaks down a population's ability to reason. Third, you isolate people. Without social interaction, humans lose the corrective force of positive examples, and they become much, much easier to condition. Finally, once the population is panicked, confused, and totally alone, an authoritarian force steps in and offers a cure, a return to order. But of course, the price for that cure is total submission and the loss of individual freedom. So how in the world do you escape this? We basically face two distinct paths. The first is totalitarian conformity, which regresses adults into a childlike state of blind obedience and just breeds total stagnation. The alternative, though, is the cure: parallel structures. Dissidents like Václav Havel realized that political action wasn't enough. You actually have to build independent communities, businesses, and institutions that operate outside the madness. You use humor and ridicule to strip demagogues of their power. You spread the truth, and you create an enclave of sanity to preserve human individuality. Part 3. Illusions of Wealth and Value. The stories we believe. All right, shifting gears completely here. We've seen how our biology and our fears can be manipulated. Let's look at the bizarre, fabricated societal values that we just blindly accept as absolute truths. The stories we tell ourselves about value. Have you ever noticed that out of 196 countries in the world, virtually none of them use the color purple on their flag? Why is that? Did the founding fathers of the world just collectively hate the color purple? Not at all. It's actually an incredible example of how humans assign completely arbitrary value to things. The answer comes down to one number, 10,000. Up until the 1800s, to get just 1 single gram of Tyrian purple dye, you had to harvest it from 10,000 specific sea snails from the Mediterranean. Think about that. Because of this grueling process, the dye literally cost 3 times its weight in gold. A single pound would cost the modern equivalent of over $50,000. Even Roman emperors had to restrict their wives from buying it. No country could afford to put purple on their flag. The value wasn't intrinsic to the color itself. It was entirely based on the artificial, painstaking scarcity of snail juice. That story perfectly highlights what Alan Watts taught about our modern obsession with money. We confuse money, which is really just an accounting measure, a concept, a piece of paper, with real wealth. Real wealth is the physical reality: food, companions, animals, lived experiences. Watts brilliantly said that choosing money over actual living is like going to a restaurant and eating the menu instead of the dinner. We are psychologically perverted to desire the symbol of value rather than the reality of it. Part 4. Ancient Codes of the Universe. Whispers from the past. So if human assigned values like money and flags are largely just arbitrary illusions, what is actually real? To find out, let's zoom out even further. We're going to leave modern society behind and look at how ancient civilizations mapped the true, objective reality of the cosmos. Now, what's really undeniable is the sheer math encoded in the Great Pyramid of Giza. This wasn't just a tomb. A lot of researchers suggest it was a literal mathematical message. If you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the exact equatorial circumference of the Earth. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by that same exact number, 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. The ancients didn't just build a monument, they built a highly precise three-dimensional scale model of our planet. And that scaling number, 43,200, it is absolutely not random. It's deeply connected to the movement of the cosmos. The Earth actually wobbles on its axis, a process called precession. It shifts 1 degree every 72 years. A full cycle of this wobble takes 25,920 years. And wouldn't you know it, 43,200 is a direct mathematical multiple of 72. This profound numerical harmony is exactly what geniuses like Nikola Tesla recognized. Tesla was famously obsessed with the numbers 3, 6, and 9. If you add up the digits in all those ancient cosmic numbers, 72, 43,200, 25,920, they all reduce to 9. Tesla believed these weren't just math tricks, but the universal laws of energy. The ancients built monuments to reflect the true mathematical heartbeat of the universe, completely bypassing our arbitrary human values. Part 5. Life is a musical dance. Waking up to the present. Okay, we've traveled from the microscopic dopamine inside our brains, through the psychological traps of society, past the illusions of money, all the way out to the cosmic math built into the pyramids. So how do we pull all these threads together to actually live our daily lives? Once again, Alan Watts provides the answer by shattering a grand illusion. We normally view life as a journey. We're put into a graded school system, we're taught to aim for graduation, then the promotion, then the retirement savings. We are always waiting to arrive at some destination, but life is not a journey. Think about it. If it were, the fastest drivers would be the best, and composers would only ever write finales. Instead, life is meant to be understood by analogy with music. It's playful. The entire point of dancing isn't to end up at a specific spot on the floor. The whole point is the dance itself, right here in the present moment. And this culminates in a really profound thought, which I want you to just let sink in for a moment. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, but we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played. Dopamine hits from a screen, the manufactured panics of society, the endless pursuit of the menu instead of the dinner, these are all just illusions distracting you from the music of life.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you go about your day. You have the tools to understand your biology, to resist societal manipulation, and to recognize the true values of this deeply connected universe. If the music of the universe is playing right now, are you dancing? Or are you still waiting for the finale? Thank you so much for tuning into this explainer, and we'll see you next time.